So it's a great pleasure for me as the Dean of our Faculty of Social Sciences and as also the President of the Pontifical Academy of Social Sciences to welcome you to this event today, which is the second in the series, Putting Catholic Social Teaching into Practice. The faculty here, the Faculty of Social Sciences, was 50 years old last year, and this project was started last year as part of that celebration, with the idea of taking the faculty forward into the next 50 years. Our story starts as part of the Faculty of Philosophy in the 1950s, the early 1950s, when Pope Pius XII took an initiative and came and asked the Dominicans here to start teaching the students who were here then, the seminarians and the priests, about modern social problems. And let's not forget that Pius XII was a leading figure in what I would say was a great generation, that generation that had experienced the terrible slide into authoritarianism in the 1930s, the cataclysmic war that followed it, but then went on to do amazing things, found the UN, proclaimed the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, build what has become the European Union, and set up the 30-year economic dream that we now call in impeccable English, us English people, the Trente Glorieuses, during which the Western economies experienced the highest growth with the lowest inequality ever recorded. So this is a generation of which Pius XII was one of the leaders that did really great things in the face of terrible social and political experiences that they had been through. So as I said, Pius XII wanted the Dominicans to help their students understand modern social problems. And so from the beginning, our way of thinking and the formation that we offer in the faculty has been interdisciplinary, focused around understanding and resolving social problems on the basis of ethical and social teaching in the church. Because the social sciences are really excellent at analyzing problems, but they are not nearly as good at synthesizing the results from the different social sciences into intelligent solutions for those same problems. Meanwhile, the philosophical and theological thinking behind Catholic social teaching, with its integrated vision of life, has the potential to offer a lot to the social sciences in helping them build integrated solutions. For 50 years, our faculty has been trying to do this on various fronts, especially in the area of economics, but also in the fields of human rights, bioethics, digital technology, among others. So with this project, Putting Catholic Social Teaching into Practice, we want to take a new step forward in the dialogue between Catholic social teaching and the social sciences, with a view to creating more capacity within the church and within the academia to synthesize solutions. Here we are focusing on using data in various ways, partly in evaluating data-based approaches to human development devised elsewhere, as well as developing indicators and forms of data representation that can help us measure how well the principles of Catholic social teaching are being applied in practice. Today's conference, under the title, The Order of Charity as Guide, Balancing Sustainable Development Goals to Prioritize the Greatest Needs, both allows us to discuss these issues and to invite the participation of others to join us in building a longer-term project. So without further ado, I would like to move on to our first speaker, who's already here with us, joining us from the US on Zoom. This is Father Albino Barrera, a Dominican friar from the province of St. Joseph in the United States. He's a professor of economics and theology at Providence College in Rhode Island. And his research interests are economic ethics and the Church's poverty alleviation work. He has taught development economics, international trade, Catholic social thought, and theological ethics for business and economics courses, among many others. Thank you very much, Father Albino.
Okay, good evening. My name is Father Alejandro Crosthwaite. I'm the professor of Catholic social teaching and political ethics at the Faculty of Social Sciences. So it is my pleasure to be the chair for the second part of this conference, which is respondents to Professor Albino's paper. So I'll present the respondents. So first of all, we have Stefano Menghinello. Where's that, Stefano? So his expertise is in industrial economics, economic statistics, industrial development, and his current role is director of the Department of Economic Environmental Statistics, National Statistics of the Office of Italy. So we welcome him. He's also affiliated with the United Nations Network of Economic Statisticians. We also have with us Elena Siaudvytiene. Her expertise will be on just integral ecology, just transition, and transformative evaluations. And her current role is as assistant professor of the LCC International University in Lithuania. Also is doing postdoctoral research here at the Angelicum through our CREATE program. So we have several students from our CREATE program. Affiliation, she's affiliated to the Economic of Francesco Academy, formerly called the Research Fellow, or was a Research Fellow there. Also at the European Commissions for Just Transition platform, GT Pierce expert for Lithuania. We also have this evening with us Professor Dr. Tony Persico, expertise in development economics, policy in fragile, conflict-affected countries, and multilateral governance, ethics, and economics. And his current role is a senior economist for the Italian Ministry of Finance. And he's affiliated to the European Investment Bank at the Board of Advisory Group, also in the Western Balkans Investment Framework Operational Board, and also he's the former advisor for the International Monetary Fund, as well as member of the G20 Development Working Group. And last but not least, we have Frère Pierre Januard, who expertise is in economic thought of St. Thomas Aquinas, theology and economics, and his current role is Professor Aggregato at our own Faculty of Social Sciences. And his affiliations are to FARE, which is the research team at the University of Paris, Pantheon-Sorbonne University. And so he will also give our final response to Professor Albino. So we welcome all our presenters this evening.
I can go ahead?
Yes.
Okay, got it. So this is just an example of Catholic social thought in practice in applying Catholic social thought to contemporary problems. An example I'd like to give is that of financing sustainable development. In particular, I'd like to present you with the problem that is currently encountered. How do we allocate limited funds where decisions have to be made? Do you do it in direct poverty alleviation, such as building schools, clinics, nutrition programs, employment creation? Or should we do climate change mitigation, where we convert dirty coal burning power plants to green solar energy? And this is a real problem at this time, because the question is not merely an academic exercise. It is in fact a problem that is upon us. So in 2023, the Paris Summit on Global Finance did not put in any new funds for climate change mitigation. Instead, they delegated it to the multilateral institutions. And as a result, climate change mitigation was added to the World Bank's mandate of poverty alleviation and shared prosperity. And by the UN's own account, the bulk of climate finance has gone to middle-income countries and not the poorest countries. So it is, in fact, a real question as to whether or not we should prioritize climate change mitigation over poverty alleviation. And so the Catholic social thought has a lot of philosophical and theological tools to offer in this regard. Let me just pick out one example, the whole notion of the common good. Common good can be posed as right relationships. And so we have the relationship between a person and God, relationship between persons, relationship between the community and each individual person, the relationship with those who are marginalized, the relationship of the community to the earth, and then we have future generations as another obligation that we have. So at a minimum, these are 6 critical relationships that must be sustained in any reasonable account of the common good. So what we have here is a clash in the face of limited resources. Let me just present you with 2 clashes. Clash number 1. Clash number 1 has to do with those who are marginalized and those who are in the general population. Whom do we prioritize? The general population would most likely want climate change mitigation. However, those who are marginalized require poverty alleviation. So that is clash number 1. Which do you prioritize? But there is a second clash. The second clash is between the demands and the needs of the current generation relative to future generations. So that is another clash that we have to deal with. So just to show you the wealth and the robustness of Catholic social thought, the order of charity is something that can be used to adjudicate this particular problem. Now, the critical thing to remember in the order of charity is that there is a big difference between benevolence. Benevolence is the goodwill that is accorded to everybody. So we are benevolent to everyone, no exceptions, no one excluded. This is universal love. That is benevolence. We distinguish this from beneficence. Beneficence is the tangible expression of such goodwill. And so in this case, we do good to others as our means and circumstances permit. This is the material expression of goodwill, where we do good. But we know that our resources are finite, and as a result, beneficence will inevitably require prudent allocation. Given the limited resources we have, we cannot be beneficent to everyone. So this is where the order of charity comes in. How do you go about going through all your obligations? So the order of charity would make the following. The order of charity, by the way, this distinction between benevolence and beneficence is something that you will find in Ambrose and also in Immanuel Kant. And so whether it is from religion or social philosophy, there is convergence with respect to the understanding on the difference between benevolence and beneficence. The order of charity is something that you will find extensively in the Judeo-Christian theology and something in social philosophy as well. So this is not something that is peculiarly Christian or limited or monopolized by Christians. Now, the main claim of the order of charity is the following: that we have primary obligations to the nearest and dearest compared to the distant and the stranger. So clearly, there is a hierarchy of obligations that we have to meet. The nearest and the dearest have the strongest claims on us before the distant and the stranger. Now, this is where the Catholic Judeo-Christian tradition comes in very strongly, and this is where they have their distinctive contribution, in that even as we recognize differences in the strength of the obligations and claims that can be made on us, there is also a limit to our obligations to the nearest and dearest. We satisfy these obligations to the level of sufficiency. And why is this important? It is important so that we are able to move further in our beneficence. We are able to move further in our beneficence because we also need to reach out to the distant and the stranger, given that human dignity is infinite. So this is a major point that should be made, that while it is true that the nearest and dearest have first claims on us over the distant and the stranger, nonetheless, there is a limit to this. How do we know where the limit is? You look for the point of sufficiency for the nearest and dearest because we are interested in moving on to beneficence for the distant and the stranger. Love is diffusive by its nature. It cannot be contained. It is not satisfied with staying put, but simply overflows. Love is forward-leaning in its beneficence. It is forward-leaning in its beneficence. And as a result, you cannot use the order of charity as an excuse for inaction or indifference, because there is a certain dynamism to the order of charity. There's a dynamism to the order of charity. And this is best captured in St. Augustine's famous line in the Confessions, right at the start of the Confessions. You have made us for yourself, O Lord, and our heart is restless until it rests in you. Love is restless in reaching out to others because love of neighbor is part of this restlessness for God. So, the key takeaways that we have on the order of charity is that in the immediate and short term, we recognize that there is a hierarchy of obligations that we have to meet. That when it comes to beneficence, we are forced to do a triage of clashing claims because we are limited in what we are able to provide. However, the second key point to remember is that love is diffusive, beneficence is forward-leaning in catching up with benevolence. It is never a stasis. And so you can see that it moves on with alacrity and eagerness, and the long-term equilibrium is that of beneficence approximating the scope of benevolence. And so we want to actualize what Pope Francis had written last week on how we should really be following the example of the Good Samaritan. It is the love that builds fraternity to all without exception. How do we get there? We get there through a beneficence that is forward-leaning. That is what the order of charity is all about. So, back to the decision on hand. How do we allocate our funds? Direct poverty alleviation or climate change mitigation? So this is where we can use the order of charity. Poverty penalty. Consider the following. The poor suffer the most from climate change. They live in the most vulnerable, marginal places that are prone to extreme weather conditions. They live in flimsy shelters with very little protection. There's the chronic destruction of what little capital they save. And then we also know that economic growth is the most effective poverty alleviation measure. Unfortunately, climate change mitigation will slow down this growth if it is not done well. And then the final thing that that the poor experience is that climate change mitigation crowds out poverty alleviation funding. Climate change mitigation crowds out poverty alleviation funding. So in all these, observe the following. In direct poverty alleviation, you build health clinics, schools, food programs. The benefits are directly and immediately felt by the poor. That is what direct poverty alleviation is able to do. In contrast, climate change mitigation, in making coal power plants green, the benefits from a marginal dollar of aid is diffused and not fully captured by the poor. They are not immediately benefits that can be felt by the poor. That is what is at stake with respect to this flash in obligations that we have. And so, using the order of charity, what we can have here is that of the order of charity, dividing it into 3 tasks. The first tranche is that of helping out those who are marginalized. So relationship number 4, this is something that we fulfill. We give priority to this. And that is where you see Sustainable Development Goal number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 being so important as you bring those who are marginalized to the level of sufficiency, the moral floor beneath which we will not allow anybody to fall. Once we've satisfied that, so this is the first tranche, the first set of goals, the Sustainable Development Goals. Once we've done that, we have tranche 2. The second tranche is that of satisfying the concerns of those within the community. Relationships number 2 and 3. We satisfy relationships number 2 and 3. And so this is where we have Sustainable Development Goals number 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 16, and 17. These are some of the Sustainable Development Goals that will pertain to relationships within the community, satisfying those needs that are felt within the community, the contemporary generation. And then the third tranche that we have is that of future generations. Once we've been able to satisfy the requirements of the current generation, it is then that we move on to the future generations, relationships number 6 and 5. And this is where we have Sustainable Development Goals number 13, 14, and 15. So this is just a very quick sketch of how we can use the order of charity in adjudicating this clash of claims between direct poverty alleviation and the climate change mitigation. Now, this is where the need comes in for metrics. This is where we need metrics. To begin with, we need to identify the moral floor for the marginalized vis-a-vis the general population, contemporary generation. So do order relationship number 4 with those who are marginalized. We have to balance this and identify what is the moral floor beneath which we will not allow them to sink. And then there is also a second moral floor for which we need metrics. And that is, what is the moral floor for the current generation vis-a-vis future generations? What is the minimum that we should provide to our current generation beneath which we will not allow anyone to sink? we also need metrics for 2 inflection points. The first inflection point is that of knowing when to move from the marginalized to those who are in the rest of the population. Knowing when it is enough of poverty alleviation and then time to move to climate change mitigation. That's the first inflection point. And the second inflection point that we should identify is that of prioritizing the needs of our current generation and knowing when to move on to the needs of the next generation, future generations. So these are the 2 inflection points that would have to be identified where we need metrics. And so at this point, I'd like to simply say that the common good is a very good framework, and its order of charity is a very good framework with which to resolve this issue. It's an example of how we can use Catholic social thought for a very practical problem that we are currently experiencing. I thank you very much.
Thank you, Albino.
Yes.
So good evening and welcome again. And so we will continue to explore, therefore, Catholic social teaching and how it can resolve ethical dilemmas in global economic environmental policy. And as Professor Barrera, Father Albino, already stated, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals provide a broad framework for addressing global challenges. But as Father Barrera has highlighted, these goals often come into conflict due to limited resources. So governments and multilateral institutions are faced with very difficult decisions. Should priority be given to poverty alleviation or climate change mitigation? And Father Barrera, and here I'm just doing very general, using Catholic social teaching, order of charity, offers an ethical way to triage and sequence these goals. And his argument rests on the principle that the preferential for the poor and the preservation of human life must take precedence over the other considerations. And he further argues that metrics are essential. Without clear benchmarks, Catholic social teaching remains therefore theoretical rather than actionable. So now we will hear today from 4 distinguished scholars who bring different perspectives to this discussion, and their expertise ranges from economic statistics and industrial development to sustainable transitions and environmental policy, from global finance and governance to Thomistic economic thought. So let us begin by listening to their insights, and so I invite to the podium first Professor Stefano Menghinello.
Okay, it is a great pleasure for me to be here and also to meet you. And we have a lot of our external coming. I'm very happy to give them a very warm welcome here. So in my reply, okay, the fundamental question I'm going to address: can we measure what Father Albino just said? This is, I think, the key question. And the answer is, of course, is not easy. It would be easier with the slide, but then I'm just waiting. So basically, the first question I'm going to address is where are we now, and if this research topic is relevant or not. So we start with the GDP, okay, and GDP is used to be the standard measure to assess economic development. I know that I cannot speak against, I cannot shoot against the piano player, because I am the piano player in this case, because I'm responsible for the GDP production in this country. But I can say that GDP has some problem, and the main problem of GDP is that is one measure that's supposed to capture a multidimensional dimension, like resilient, sustainable, and inclusive growth. So it is impossible for just one number to capture at least three different dimensions. So although most recently we have adopted some innovations, so we are developing a satellite account and environment account which are interconnected with the GDP framework. So somehow the GDP framework is a bit expanding. It's not just one number, it's more than one number. But the main achievement is that the United Nations and also OECD, they have defined a multiple goal approach. And this multiple goal approach is based on SDGs and FASS framework. So now we have a large set of quantitative targets. So we have more than one goal to capture the complexity of economic development, to be resilient, sustainable, and also social inclusive. And of course, when you have more than one goal, and then we have a conflict. So basically, conflict is raised naturally from the fact that you have budget constraint and you have a multiple goal. And those conflicts are raised very strongly recently. Then we are in the current phase, we are facing a just transition. So just transition basically means that we want, in theory, we want to perceive all of this goal, but in practice we cannot because they are, we have a budget constraint, and some of those goals are in conflict. As Father Albino said, okay, poverty alleviation is at least in the short term is an alternative to environmental sustainability, because you have a limited number and you have to make a choice. So where are we now? We are in this phase of just transition, and then we have a great uncertainty. So government, company, and also the civil society, they like very much this multiple goal framework, but essentially they don't know how to make the right choice. So somehow we are lost in transition, and I suppose that, and my understanding is that Father Albino approach can help us to give us knowledge and also direction to do the right thing in the interest of the common good. So now I've just tried to make a list of the key components of the SDG framework. So everyone agreed that SDGs framework is the right measurement framework to achieve a balanced development. But is this framework, can this framework be implemented in quantitative informed policy making? So can we basically define a data modeling approach which can embrace all these dimensions? Okay, this is not very easy. Basically, I tried to very shortly describe the key component of the SDGs framework. We have 17 goals. This means that we have multiple goals, and each of these goals is affected by external and internal trade-off. And then we also have resource constraint. So we cannot, be utopistic. We have to be realistic. And then we have 169 targets, and the good news is that those targets are based on quantitative official data. So those are reliable indicators. But also, this framework says that goals are integrated and indivisible. This means this is a very nice word for a theoretical, but not very big nightmare for a statistician, because if you say integrated and indivisible, this means that those goals are simultaneous and interconnected. So you cannot split them. In principle, you cannot set priority. And then those goals should balance economic, social, and environmental dimension. And we don't have any weight structure. So basically, okay, this is another big claim, but with little empirical implication. And also, there are other issues that I'm going through very quickly. So basically, one of the problems is that we also have to take into account local and national specificities. So each community, each country has its own economic structure, social structure, and as a specific capacity building, and this should be taken into account. This is good, but this means that the ranking of SDGs goal should be national and local specific, being also interconnected with the national and also the global dimension. Another very interesting part of the SDGs framework is that stakeholders should be actively involved in the process of achieving those goals. And this process should be transformative. Transformative is a very nice word, but on the other side means then the parameter change from a priori and after. This means that you cannot predict the outcome because this is a transformative approach. And then, the SDGs framework also acknowledge that goals are interdependent, but basically they don't make any quantitative assessment, how they are, can you identify direction, can you identify the magnitude of this interconnection? Not really, they just basically speak about synergy, they never speak about conflict. So this is basically another bias, and also those goals are interdependent at the global and national, local level because of globalization. And also we have to take into account the impact on the future generation. So this is a very complex model, okay? It's not easy, it's good in principle, but it's quite complicated to be implemented. Now I'll just move to, which is the contribution made by Father Albino to this framework before I speak about possible modeling solution. So basically, Father Albino has provided us a very, very good framework, which is not only a Catholic framework. I think this is also basically a very rational framework, because in the presence of limited resources, you have to do optimization. You have constraint, and you have to take that into account independently from your own Catholic opinion, which also are my opinion, but let's speak in a very rational way. But basically, the idea is that Father Albino approach has exploited the full set of relevant stakeholders. So he has said clearly that which are the stakeholders, the marginalized and the future generation are always ignored in decision process, because the marginalized has a limited power, and the future generation, okay, they are not already here, some are young people, but said, okay, if you want to face that, you have to consider all the stakeholders, not only the ones that are more powerful and are more influential to you. He also has tried to establish interconnection between SDGs. This is an order of charity, we have to address this issue in the right way. So basically, interconnection between SDGs are needed. We cannot ignore interconnection between SDGs. Okay, so Father Albino has made interconnection unambiguous. So basically, although those are not quantitatively measured by Father Albino, he's proposing us a hierarchical structure that links them together, and which is inspired by Catholic social thought. But this is just a matrix of value, which can also be compared with other value, because we have to reach a global consensus. And on the other side, that matrix of value is not that far from UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights, because the UN Declaration of Human Rights is also rooted on fundamental principle about poverty alleviation. So SDGs are rooted on that. So somehow we are closing a circle, but we also want to have a greater consensus also outside of the Catholic community, just because we want to be inclusive. And also Father Albino approach has also exploited interconnection and ranking between different levels of analysis, the local, the national, and the global. Love is diffusive, so it doesn't mean that we have to make barrier at the frontier, but also we have to establish, a set of priorities about. And in terms of using this framework for setting, priority setting, we have also to take into account that human dignity and solidarity, so the preferential option for the poor, is unlimited. When it's unlimited, it's a measure. When it's unmeasurable, it's not classificable. So basically, it's out of any rank, human dignity. Also, and this hierarchical structure is not absolute, but is conditional to the sufficiency principle, about which Tony is going to speak, because it is one of the crucial points. So we need metrics to do that in the right way. Last but not least, we have shared value. So basically, we cannot use an utilitaristic approach by saying that SDGs can be implemented on the basis of individual preferences. Individual preferences, they will not lead to the common good. So this is very important. Last but not least, basically, I'm just describe which are the three alternative approach to implement SDGs, including Father Albino approach. Can you stop? Okay, thank you. So basically, so we have three alternative methodological approach. The first one is at the very early stage. So we do not have a macroeconomic theory which brings together all this interconnection. We are looking for that, but it's not there. So we don't have, we have some paper, we have seen some paper that try to manage transition between competitiveness and environment, so, but are only one against one. This is one against many. So the theory is not ready. Some economists say that we need a holistic approach, which doesn't mean anything. I think we need further Albino approach, but this is my personal opinion. And then we have statistical methods. So statistical methods are the method that independently from a economic theoretical framework can allow us to manage priority setting and investment decisions. So we have one specific field of statistics, which is called operational research, which is between statistics and also engineering, which has the power of making priority, of selecting based on all the specification that we have described before. And then also we have also to pay attention to the consensus, to the active role of stakeholder. So basically we can also adopt a consensus-based approach, which is used in the United States to bring consensus around complicated on a regulatory framework. And also we have participative decision-making. So I think that we have different methodological options and we have to possibly combine them. Last but not least is the role of civil society. Is the role of civil society can be measured? Is transformative capacity can be measured? Not yet. And also can value be incorporated in decision process? This is the goal. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Stefano. So just to kind of summarize very generally, so I think, so therefore prioritizing SDGs would be using Catholic social teaching out of charity, so you accepted that, but placing poverty alleviation first, Iomeno. SDG interdependencies, so goals can be complementary, synergistic, or conflicting over time, so we need to highlight that. Local versus global, so advocates for subsidiarity, allowing local communities to shape SDG policies. So the stakeholders. Sufficiency thresholds, so calls for clear criteria to determine when to shift priorities. And then statistics modeling, so suggest tools like multi-criteria decision, but warns against reducing ethical choices to pure data. Okay, so adesso now we have the another respondent, so Elena Siaudvytiene, and so she will now do her presentation.
While we wait for the slides, I would like to say good afternoon to everyone, and I'm really honored to be here in this conference as part of discussion how to put Catholic social teaching into practice and also how to develop metrics for it. So my comments will be a lot aligned with Professor Menghinello's presentation, and I will share my brief ideas on this presented work of Father Barrera's, and I would like really to thank Father Albino for his contribution into this common effort to putting Catholic social teaching into practice, into searching the ways how to develop metrics for measuring it. So Father Barrera offers a valuable and important framework, and in my presentation I would like to suggest two complementary considerations. So first of all, focusing on synergies that were already mentioned, and also talk about potential of qualitative evaluation methods. A key concept in Father Barrera's analysis is the threshold of sufficiency. And it is the point, as we heard, at which resources can be directed from immediate poverty alleviation to other goals like climate mitigation and other goals as well. But the question that I would like to raise is, can we realistically reach this threshold if we treat poverty alleviation and climate mitigation as separate or sequential objectives? So we can take a look at the scientific evidence that increasingly demonstrates that climate change disproportionately affects the most vulnerable populations. So climate change exacerbates the existing vulnerabilities and inequalities, and it also hinders the poverty alleviation efforts. So for example, the latest IPCC synthesis report states that human and ecosystem vulnerability are interdependent. So not only in theory, as increasing weather and climate extreme events have exposed millions of people to acute food insecurity and reduced water security. Furthermore, especially when we think about the scarce resources, the limited funds, it is good to remember the Stern report that was published back in 2007, which demonstrated that if we don't act, so overall costs and risks of climate change will be equivalent to losing at least 5% of global GDP per year, now and forever, so each year. But if we take into account the wider risks and impacts, then the estimates are that we will be losing about 20% of GDP per year. In contrast, the cost of action can be limited just to around 1% of GDP per year. So this can help to save those scarce resources that we are talking about. So if we divert resources away from climate mitigation, we risk perpetuating a cycle of vulnerability, making the threshold of sufficiency a moving target that remains perpetually out of reach. While, as we heard, the potential synergies are acknowledged broadly, and also Father Barrera acknowledges them in his work, the framing sometimes seems to suggest a mutually exclusive relationship. So I believe that it's very important also to emphasize equally the potential for simultaneous progress on both goals, or we can say broader on, as it is. Also, it was mentioned on all the goals of sustainable development. IPCC's sixth assessment report highlights the importance of redistributive policies and social safety nets, and especially just transition, which was mentioned the first time in the newest report, in achieving deeper societal ambitions and resolving those trade-offs. So thinking about poverty, for example, investments in sustainable agriculture could at the same time improve food insecurity and reduce greenhouse gas emissions, as well as create opportunities, economic opportunities for the marginalized communities. And such perspective, I see it as strongly aligned with the integral ecology as articulated in Laudato Si. Pope Francis emphasizes the need for an integrated approach to combating poverty, restoring dignity to the excluded, and at the same time protecting nature. So we cannot effectively address one challenge in isolation from the others. Therefore, I would argue that softening the claim of the inevitable clash between SDGs, I do not say that the clash does not exist, but I think it can be softened, and we could explore the benefits of more holistic approach. So, moving to the next point, Father Barrera rightly points out that there is a challenge of translating Catholic social teaching principles into measurable indicators, particularly when we think about contextual and evolving needs. So there are different needs in different times and in different places. And I believe this is where qualitative assessment methods such as transformative evaluations, already mentioned, could play a crucial role. Transformative evaluations, they emphasize participatory, inclusive approaches that prioritize the experience, the lived experience of marginalized communities. So they can help us to develop context-sensitive assessment framework. So there could be not individualistic, not as it was mentioned as well, but it could be their way to understand what is the common good and how they see the way to achieve this common good. And this could reflect also the local realities and values. Also, I think it's important to mention that transformative evaluation, they currently increasingly incorporate ethics into them, and this could be a valuable entry point for Catholic social teaching in development of new metrics. So to conclude, Father Barrera's work provides a valuable framework for navigating the complex trade-offs inherent in sustainable development, but by emphasizing the importance of Catholic social teaching, and he offers powerful ethical foundation for prioritizing and sequencing the SDGs. However, I believe that we can strengthen this framework by more fully embracing the synergies between poverty alleviation and climate change mitigation, and aligning our approach with the integral ecology of Laudato Si. Also, it could be strengthened by incorporating qualitative assessment methods to develop our understanding and stronger impact of Catholic social teaching. Thank you very much. I look forward to a discussion, and these are the references that I mentioned in my presentation.
Thank you. So just to quickly summarize, therefore, so Elena presented to us, so Father Albino Barrera's framework effectively prioritizes poverty alleviation over climate change mitigation, but it risks overlooking synergies between the two goals. The concept of threshold of sufficiency, so when poverty alleviation has succeeded enough to shift focus to climate mitigation, may be a moving target as climate changes exacerbate, also affect poverty. Also talked about integral ecology as outlined in Laudato Si, advocated for a holistic approach, treating poverty alleviation with environmental sustainability as interconnected rather than sequential. And then while Catholic social teaching must develop a qualified metrics, it should also incorporate qualitative and transformative evaluative methods to ensure ethical, community-centered decision-making, and the Catholic social principle of prioritizing kin and local communities should be further grounded in theological insights, distinguishing it from secular natural law. Okay, thank you very much. So now we present Tony Persico, who will do his response. Please.
So first of all, thank you for having me here. It was an honor to discuss and review the paper of Father Barrera. And usual disclaimer apply. So unfortunately, the Department of the Treasury is not yet into the order of charity kind of discussion. We had SDGs discussion, but not yet order of charity type discussion. So opinions are just my own. And I think one of the key points is clear from also the other responses is that Father Barrera's approach is here to stay. We may call it a quantitative social teaching approach, but is it here to say not just because of the answer it provides, but because of the depth of the question that it raises. And I do think that there are at least 3 critical issues that are well highlighted by Father Barrera's work, and some have already been noted, and I wanted to underline at least these 3 issues regarding the context of the SDGs, regarding the method of analysis, and the final one is the kind of issues that are related to the ownership of the process. So the first issue is contextual. The formulation of the SDGs clearly followed a quantitative utilitarian approach. We see that we have 17 goals, 169 targets, over 200 indicators. So a metric was requested, but now we have a cathedral of metrics, really a quantitative building. And the issue is that there are no priorities in this building. So we have this huge mass of targeting process with no priorities. And if we go back, even at the very origins of the utilitarian ethics with John Stuart Mill, so basically there was a qualitative component that allowed for a ranking of objectives. There were some superior and inferior objectives. Here, in the SDG framework, there are no explicit priorities. So those elements of qualitative prioritization is totally lost. And if this does not seem problematic enough, let me add that in 4 months, we will have the 4th International Conference on Finance for Development in Seville. And this conference is called to define basically the future development policies for the next decade, particularly in terms of how to finance SDGs. So some have already referred to this conference as the Judgment Day of Sustainable Development Finance. So the discussion we are having now is not just timely, it may be even too late to discuss about this kind of topic. So now the UN reports that less than 20% of the target are on track, while SDG financing gaps are widening, because basically we have multiple crises that impacted the poverty reduction efforts, but the growth trajectory in middle and low-income countries itself are now impacted by the multiple crises. Furthermore, we have a lot of donor fatigue. There is a lot of donor fatigue looming in the international community. For instance, as we talk, the United States are funding the USAID, that basically is the first provider of development aid in the world. So the international community must do more with fewer resources, and this scenario makes any guidance on qualitative prioritization very highly valuable. So in my view, while Father Barrera aims for a quantitative framework, is looking for metrics, his proposal raises a crucial question about qualitative dimensions, one that is totally absent in the SDG context. And the second kind of issues is methodological. So basically we can framework the problem Father Barrera is posing us as an allocation framework. Where should the money go first? And this is the kind of a core discussion expected to take place in Seville. But even if this is complex, we have various methodologies to do this kind of exercise. No? But the issue is that Father Barrera pushed the bar even higher, because he is seeking to establish a minimum basket of goods and services that defines the viable moral flow. This is a different game. This is not an allocation framework. This is a different framework. And so we move from setting an allocation rule to defining a threshold of sufficiency for the poorest, the general population, the future generation. This is a task that goes beyond the SDGs and is both complex and also intrinsically political in a sense, in a good way, because it needs to be the result of a compromise about competing interests and opinions and values. So we have a few potential way forward to build this kind of matrix and moral floor or this sort of multidimensional floor. So basically we can rely on the easiest way would be to use absolute and relative measures, such the poverty lines used by the World Bank. Or again, we can use the marginal approach, something that Father Barrera mentioned, where the $1 extra would make the greatest impact. So this is another kind of matrix, to see where resources can do the more, and this is usually used for impact financing, when we have, for example, to allocate development funding for health initiatives, immunization, these kind of things, where we need to assess which one of the medicine or the vaccine or whatever is having the highest impact in a certain region. Also, we can use some non-predatory, some that are called non-predatory approaches, which are usually used for direct cash transfer and for fiscal policies. When you say pocket money, when you give directly money to the people. So what kind of measure, how much money we need to transfer or reallocate within our communities to alleviate poverty without operating any re-ranking, they say. So we don't want to take away too much from the rich to give to the poor. No worries, this risk is not there. But still, in the definition of the problem is that we don't want you to have non-predatory reallocations. And these elements altogether can generate a fair amount of complexity. Believe me, this is sort of a multidimensional tensor with a temporal dynamic, so it will be a very complex beast to treat from a methodological point of view. But we have tools to deal with complexity, and we have Stefano here that is a statistician. Usually they use analytical tools to operate dimensionality reductions. We as economists are a little bit on the easier side. We use just simplification and assumptions and hypotheses. So I think that both from the statistical point of view and the economics point of view, we have the kind of methodological, analytical, and also conceptual tools to address this kind of complexity. So we can use analytical methods, but we can use a microeconomic modeling. For example, using utilities, and if we want to have a more nuanced approach, we can use also the capabilities approach. So looking for all those non-monetary dimensions of well-being. And the question of which approach to follow remains open here. And whenever we pick a kind of matrix or another, we face a clear methodological trade-off here. Because basically, we have a trade-off between data complexity, the more things we want to put in the model, we want to analyze, and actionable policy insight. So basically, the big issue is that the more the beast become complex, the less is easier to be understood and shared by policymakers that are the ones that deliver the policy on the field. So we need to be also practical, otherwise we will have a new relativity theory and no practical impact on the field. So basically we need to decide where to set the bar in this trade-off between complexity, how many things, all the things are important, but what we can put inside the model and the kind of readability the model will have when transferred to policymaker. And where to put the bar is again an open question. And the final point is on ownership. So it is not a secret that SDGs were the product of basically a UN level negotiation. If you look at the SDGs, they basically reflect the kind of structure of the UN agency, so you can read between the lines what kind of negotiation happened there within the governments and the delegated the UN Assembly. So there was a very limited engagement from external stakeholders. They had consultation, public consultation, yes, but there is something missing. And while there is a broad agreement on the SDGs, tension still persists and notable gaps remain here, because there are particularly some area like demography. I think about the target 3.7 and the target 5.6, and democracy, target 16.6 and 0.7. So basically, if you look at the SDGs, there's not the word democracy. So that's a big issue. And also the kind of things are written there about demography, reproductive rights. I mean, there are things that are complicated to be transferred on the field. Okay? So I think that Father Barrera's approach could help us address this lack of ownership by advocating for a greater engagement in the operationalization of the SDGs at the local level. So his approach provides a way to critically reassess elements of the SDGs that may not align well with the sensibility of the local communities. And moreover, Catholic Social Thinking has this incredible conceptual set of resources to deal with this kind of issues, because I think to concepts like subsidiarity, human integral development, all these kind of concepts can be leveraged to create this sort of transition and, let's say, reassessment of SDGs. So to conclude, in the history of Catholic social thinking, I think we always oscillate between phases of denunciation and phases of proposals or more prophetic approach. I think the Rerum Novarum, Sollicitudore Socialis, like denunciation documents, and Populorum Progressio, Caritas in Veritate, like prophetic ones. Under Pope Francis, we have seen a mix of both, the denunciation of an economy that kills, but we also have a new decentralized activism. I am also a member of the Economy of Francesco. So which also called for a renewed promotion of multilateralism from the below, so an engagement with the local communities, with the people on the field. And I do think that a quantitative approach to Catholic social teaching can certainly support and strengthen these efforts of renewed activism within the church and with the local communities. Thank you.
And I'll skip my summary because we're really falling behind. So I'm going to invite now Father Pierre Januard to come up to the microphone.
So good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, Father Albino. Thank you very much for your very stimulating and very interesting presentation. I will have just 3 points to respond and maybe to talk with Father Albino. The first one is on charity and justice. The second one will be on metrics, and the third one will be on the ecological and social aspects of Catholic social teaching and this specificity of integral approach. The first one on charity and justice, in fact, I think we have to clarify what belongs to charity and what belongs to justice. It's two different orders, and I think it's important to be clear on justice and charity. For example, human rights, it belongs to justice. It is a duty of justice to try to improve human rights, but we have also to live in a charity life, and but charity is not, maybe it's not a due, maybe it's something more, something else in addition. Charity is a Christian virtue. Albino told very truly that it is already in the philosophy, and it is not only in the Christian theology, but it is a theological virtue also, and maybe mainly. And to live in a charity life, it's maybe a kind of Christian-specific addition to help people, and a kind of integral approach to help people with a social, ecological, maybe spiritual approach. And the order of love is coming from God, helping in the name of God, who teaches us to love each other. And maybe it could be interesting to clarify in the Catholic social teaching what is commanded by the virtue of justice. So the Church addresses a universal call to the world, Christian and non-Christian. And the virtue of charity, the Church organizes the Christian response to human difficulties. So maybe we can work and talk about it. The second point would be on the need for metrics for Catholic social teaching. And thank you very much, Albino, because I think it's very important to introduce some metrics and some maths in this approach. Sorry. Yeah. Thank you. We need some metrics for two reasons, I think. The first one is because the Catholic social teaching programs are run thanks to donors or thanks to taxpayers sometimes, but to whom we are morally accountable. We have to tell them what their money did. And the second point is that the Catholic social teaching programs are not run to have a clear conscience, to be clear in front of God, but also to be, and maybe mainly, to be efficient, in fact. There is a need for direct and indirect, I think, Catholic social teaching metrics. The first one is maybe easier, evaluating human and financial investment and impact of Catholic Church, direct social, medical, ecological activities. Maybe it's easier. The second point is maybe more difficult but fascinating, is to evaluate human and financial investments and impact of all the actions made by Christians and non-Christians, but inspired by the Catholic Church teaching in about social issues. It is more difficult because it is huge, but I think it could be interesting to try to evaluate it. Metrics help to make choices and prioritizing with a more objective approach. Maths are very important, but they are just here as an help to decision, because prioritizing remains a human, philosophical, and political act for which we are responsible before God, if we are believers, and mankind. So the last point, Okay, the last point, so thank you. About the integral approach of the Catholic social teaching, and it was very interesting in the talk of the speech of Father Barrera, because in fact he focused on the different people or groups before on the different elements. I think it's interesting to keep an integral approach before splitting, before trying to separate what is ecological, what is social, what is medical, or whatsoever. So until the 17th century, in a lexical approach, only the earth produces in economic texts, not human being. In the Bible, if you look at the Genesis in the Vulgate in Latin, the water produces, land, earth produces, God produces, and in the gospel, trees produces fruits, but and not the man. When the man product, it's for produces is just for take something forward, not to create something. And it's the same thing in Thomas Aquinas' works. It is the region. It's not in De Malo. It's in De Regno. De Regno, the political treatise of Thomas Aquinas. But it is the region which produces, not the human being. And the first human act is to choose the most fertile region to build the city. So the human being receives the production from the earth, and the first act is to a kind of political act, because it's the city. It's to find the best place to build the city. And after that, the human being receives the production. He transforms it through craft or agricultural, and it transports, sells by trade to satisfy needs. So we see that we have an ecological approach respecting the earth and its production, and a social approach satisfying primary needs through a fair exchange, through just price or something like that. And so that these ecological and social approaches are linked in the same wide supply chain, in fact. So I think this integral dimension of the Catholic social teaching is its true value. And it's very interesting because the popes stressed this point, and I think it's very important and very useful. So prioritizing, is not choosing ecological versus social programs or approaches, but selecting the more urgent integral programs to the people who have the most important needs today. And the Catholic social teaching is useful to address Christian ecological and sociological and social duty, in fact, coming from God's creation, and to try to go on and following and being in the line of what God gave us. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much for all our respondents. And so now we will allow Father Barrera to do his final comments, to respond either to the respondents or to do a conclusion.
Alejandro,
Yes.
can you hear me?
Yes.
One suggestion, because we lost a lot of time. How about opening the floor for the audience to
For
ask
questions already?
questions?
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll
Yeah.
do that. Okay, so Father Barrera would like to hear any questions from the audience or of anybody else present? And probably they have to come to the podium so he can see them. Yeah, because otherwise Father Albino won't see them.
You could just convey the question too.
Any general questions? Yes, please come.
Oh, great.
Oh, okay.
By the way, thank you, Father, for your presentation. I think it's very, for me in particular, very refreshing and nourishing to hear. And just in the conversations that we have, if you could throw more light to the, I don't call it a challenge, but to the comparison that was made between threshold of sufficiency and the allocation approach, which you raised. I think it's very key. Do you think that these two could partner, or do you think they are mutually exclusive? The question of your proposal of threshold of sufficiency and the allocation approach, which is what most governments and most organizations use.
Can I respond right now?
Yeah, why don't you respond to, yeah.
Okay, sure, yeah.
We cannot see you for some
Absolutely.
reason, but.
I completely agree. They're not mutually exclusive. In fact, they are mutually reinforce and complement each other, because you cannot really do allocation unless you have an idea of levels of sufficiency. And in fact, you strengthen the basis for allocation by being very clear with respect to the moral and economic dimensions and requirements of sufficiency. So it is the understanding of sufficiency that will allow one to do a good job of allocation. So I think if you remove the notion of sufficiency from allocation, that's going to be trouble when it comes to allocation. Okay. And the nice thing about putting the notion of sufficiency in allocation is that you immediately already affirm the importance of integral human development, because sufficiency really revolves around human dignity.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Yes, please.
Father Barrera, hi, I'm Teresa, one of your students from last year. Thank you so much for your talk, for your paper. I particularly liked how you underlined about the level of sufficiency where one privileges the nearest. Like when it's sufficient, the needs of these people are to be covered.
I lost.
More or less.
Just come up here, come up here.
So just in the sense, Father, of how when the level of sufficiency is covered for the nearest, and then since the dignity of the stranger, of the distant, is unlimited, how you drew this distinction and how you brought up how the Good Samaritan as an example of how Pope Francis addresses particularly what's going on in the border between the US and Mexico. And my question is, I recently read about how even the order of charity can be used to say the distant are not the ones in the border because they are near, right? They are not from Mars or even like Siberia. So I wanted to ask you if this is an argument that you could like say that it's valid, particularly in this context of the border of US-Mexico, where it's where the order of charity has become so famous recently. Thank you so much, Father.
Yeah.
Risa, it is such a joy, such a joy to see you. Thank you for this question. I guess people are aware of the controversy that suddenly surrounded Order of Charity in light of the politics here in the U.S. I can tell you that we arrived at this topic way before the controversy. And so it just complicated the Order of Charity. So I think it's important to remember that there are a number of points about your question. The first is that in terms of Central Americans, Mexicans at the borders of the United States, so there's the question as to whether or not they're even the distant, because they're neighbors. So that's there's a point to that, because you're neighbors. And so in terms of obligations, there are strong obligations precisely because you are neighbors. So there is truth to that point with respect to being neighbors. There are some neighbors that are closer and some neighbors that are more distant. Now, with respect to the Good Samaritan, the Good Samaritan is a very good paradigm of benevolence, universal love for everyone, even for the enemy, as in the case of the Samaritan and the man who fell in with the robbers. But beneficence gets to be complicated in that there was somebody who actually brought up the point. The Good Samaritan had only one person to help. And so it was straightforward. He simply had to help. Now, what if the Good Samaritan had been faced with 2 people who are injured, and he has resources only for one of them? That's a better way of using the Good Samaritan in terms of the need to make a decision as to how to allocate what you have, what little that you have that will not really cover both persons. So that was a question that had been raised as well with respect to the Good Samaritan. And that is where the order of charity kicks in. I think at some point you have to make a triage of obligations in situations where you are unable to satisfy the needs of both. Now, let me just put a footnote here. You will observe that whether for social philosophy or Christian theology, and you will find this even in Thomas Aquinas, all bets are off in the face of life-threatening situations. In the face of life and death needs, all bets are off, because even your obligations to your own family, to your kin, they are essentially trumped by the needs of the one who is really in danger. And this is true not only for theology, but also true for social philosophy. I think that's important to note. The problem here is that people will disagree with respect to what constitutes life and death situations. That is where the debates will come in. But as a general rule, the order of charity, is subject to that as well. Thank you for the question, Teresa.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Yes, prego.
Hi. Well, I have a more fundamental question. It's a bit, it's not easy for me to talk about that, because I think that there is a priority problem and also a relevance on the problems. Because we know, or we already know from IPCC alarms and other scientific production, that if we don't do anything about climate change, we will not live. So, and mankind can destroy the creation of God. I don't think in the history where any worst sin. So I think this is a sort of framework we have to consider and we have to accept. And I think that synergies between objectives is the only possibility, because I worked for 25 years on international cooperation, and now I know that apart from very specific emergency projects, now we can say that any development activity has to be sustainable. We cannot separate these two issues. And the sustainable way is always more effective and intelligent. So just this is something that is maybe a personal difficulty for me, and it's not easy for me to talk about that. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. You know, this is an excellent question, and I completely agree with you that climate change is an imperative, because otherwise all of us are going to be in trouble. And so I completely agree with you with respect to the synergies, and the point that Elena had also mentioned earlier, that we should really explore complementarities, because this is the only way of making it sustainable. But what you had mentioned also highlights the problem, in that what happens here is that the poor are crowded out. So let me give you one very concrete example. Let us say that you are the economic minister of a poor country. You're the economic minister of a poor country, and you have been given $10 million as a grant. $10 million as a grant. Now, you as the economic minister will have to make a decision as to how to spend that $10 million. And as you very well know, projects are lumpy in their cost. You know, there's a minimum economic size. So it isn't as if you could split it. So let us say you're given $10 million. So what do you do with that $10 million? Do you build a seawall? A seawall to already, you know, prepare for the rising ocean? Do you use that 10 million to build a solar energy grid? Or do you put that $10 million to subsidizing nutrition, to putting up schools, to putting up health clinics? So in many, many cases, synergies are great. They're wonderful. Nonetheless, for people out in the field, for the ministers, economic ministers, they have to make a decision when it comes to which one do you pursue, since you are unable to pursue both at the same time. So that is the difficulty. And given the visibility of climate change as an issue, it is the poor who will be essentially bearing the brunt and carrying the opportunity cost of putting those funds for climate change mitigation. So that is the dilemma. Synergies are great, but there are many projects, especially those related to human capital formation, that do not readily, easily lend themselves to a tie-up with climate change mitigation. I hope that helps. Or if you have any other follow-up questions, that would be great.
Okay, thank you. Maybe one more question, if any. Okay, thank you very much. So we want to thank Father Albino for his presentation. We want to thank all the respondents to Father Albino's presentation. Thank you very much for your contribution. Thank you very much for your questions. Before we close, we have one last presentation regarding this program.
So we'll try to be very brief. As you see, the proposal is part of the Putting Catholic Social Teaching into Practice project. And this is a research project here at the Faculty of Social Science. And the background of this project is basically to use the Catholic social teaching as a guide for decision makers, the business community, and the civil society. But as we know, there is a sort of a distance between mainstream economics and policies and Catholic social teaching. This is mainly based on the restrictive approach of the economic theory and also the adoption of quantitative models. That is what we were talking about, what was missing in Catholic social teaching right now. So the SDGs are an opportunity because they encompasses many topics from Catholic social teaching. For example, the preferential option for the poor and the need to balance economic progress and the environmental sustainability. And also we've seen that there is a lot of common ground and a lot of support for SDGs among international institutions, governments, and non-profit institutions. However, we know that there is a problem of complexity and a problem of implementation, so that there is growing uncertainty on cooperation. So there are also potential conflict between different types of transitions. So we have a lot to do, a lot of work, of analysis we can do on this kind of links between Catholic social teaching and SDGs, leveraging on the common grounds. So the goal of this research project is to start from an in-depth understanding of the Catholic social teaching principles, to link those principles to the analysis of the SDGs, of the target indicators, in order to support a responsible and quantitative decision making, and also to promote a concrete SDGs priority setting that is based on those principles. And the three key points of the research are the development of a conceptual framework rooted in Catholic social teaching to support the analysis of the SDGs, to set up the metrics and the models to support this CST informed decision making, and also to create and to identify business cases to test the feasibility and the scalability of this kind of approach. And the project implementation so far, well, we've seen that the first point is well tackled by Father Barrera approach on the classification of the SDG based on the order of charity. The second point is currently under investigation by a team of experts that are researching the most appropriate statistical metrics and economic modeling, and the point C is still at the very beginning, at the very early stage, to collect and developing this business case from different perspectives, from international organization to local communities, so different levels. And the expected outcome is to create a set of procedures and standards and metrics that can help decision makers to correctly and objectively identify priority inspired by Catholic social teaching. And this sort of set of procedures should be also acknowledged as responsible and effective by others within a set of alternatives. So it should be something that can be open to the whole research community. And this is obviously a call to action, because we seek active engagement with national and international experts, contribution from stakeholders that can have the form of business cases, support for research issues and topics, and also financial support for PhD scholarships. And for further information, you can contact the Dean of the Faculty, Professor Helen Alford, and I guess this is the right email address. And I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good night to everyone. And we do have a little aperitif after the celebration, so we invite you to continue discussion there. Thank you very much. Good night.